talking about, did we really evolve from apes? Spoiler alert, what's the answer?
No.
Like we said last week, hell no. What we were talking about.
That recorded it.
That's okay. She knows she's on. She's on.
Well, last week we were talking about heaven, so that was appropriate this time. But, so I was at the gym a couple weeks ago, and my gym has like a couple different TVs, so you don't have complete control over what's going on, but some things are interesting, some things are annoying, and you try not to watch them. So I was on the treadmill, and there was a special on the History Channel, and it was about the Tower of Babel. And they were talking about how elaborate the structure was, and all this other stuff. They came to the conclusion that it was because aliens came and helped them build it. And that the Bible was really just covering up the fact that they're trying to explain away where the languages came from, and really they came from aliens, but the Bible just has this cover story for what could have happened.
History Channel?
Yes. Yes. And so, kind of like we were talking about last week when we talked about the all roads lead to heaven. And I'm sorry?
That's okay. Keep going.
Okay. And what it comes down to is if you don't believe the truth, then you're likely to buy into just about anything. So if you don't stand for God, you will fall for anything, and that's what's happening. So if you're not willing to buy into the fact that there is one way to get to heaven, if you're not willing to buy into the fact that God had a plan and He was the master creator and He was here before anything else was here, and that He holds all creation in the palm of His hand, if you're not willing to buy into that, then you will accept any explanation. And that's really what evolutionary theory is all about. And that's what we're going to talk about. The fact of the matter is, evolutionary theory is not better science than creation theory. We're going to put that out there right now. In fact, you'll see it's really not even science. But it's one of those things that there had to be another explanation for what happened, and people were willing to accept it, even with limited backing and research. So the truth of the matter is that neither creation or evolution is observable or repeatable. Think about that. So when people want to say, oh, evolution is science, how dare you even deny that or contradict that? You can't repeat evolution. You can't repeat creation either, but neither one can be empirically proven by science. And that's what I think we have to understand, is that we are on equal footing. The evolutionary or the materialists, we're going to talk a little bit about materialism and what's the other word? There's another word for it too. But they want to believe that is fact. But it's interesting, because neither side can be proven, it all depends on what your worldview is, the conclusions that you reach. So the materialist or the naturalist. Has anyone heard those terms before? Do you know what's meant by that?
What is it?
Materialism or naturalism? I've heard it explained. So materialists believe that there's only what can be seen and what can be felt, and what can be experienced. Okay, material. So materialism does not mean they like to shop a lot, like me. It's a different meaning of materialism. But it means that there's no room for God, basically, is what it means. So when materialists research the beginning of creation and the beginning of time, they get to a point where they reach the edge of the proverbial box, because they believe that there can be nothing outside the box. So they reach the edge of the box, and they can no longer explain, and we're going to talk about in a minute, like DNA, for example, they can no longer explain how that came to be. So it all goes into evolutionary theory. But there are several biological puzzles that continue to stump evolutionists that are easily explained by creation. And so that's what we're going to start with that. And the first one is life from non-life. The idea that something can spring up out of nothing. Contrary to popular opinion, Darwin's theory was never intended to prove how things originated, essentially because he couldn't. So basically he was explaining, is anyone familiar with natural selection? What that is? So, and we're going to explain this a little bit more, but he tried to explain how life came, but he never really got there. Do you know what I'm saying? So he never really came up with a good explanation for how life came from nothing, because it never has. It's never been proven that anything can come from nothing. And I'll give you an example. We can build spaceships and rockets to send people to Mars and then to the moon, but you cannot engineer a housefly. Think about that. Isn't that amazing? Even when they're talking about cloning animals, what does cloning mean?
You have to have an original.
They're copying the DNA. Exactly. So there is no life from non-life except for what we find in Genesis chapter 1, where he says God spoke it into existence. The second one, and this ties into the first one, is information of life. So kind of think of it in terms of a computer. You have your hardware, but then you have to program software for the end user to be able to communicate with the hardware, right? So the idea of there has to be information to be able to run organisms. And so this idea of the information of life doesn't spring just from out of nowhere. Have you ever heard about like a single strand of DNA, the complexity in that? Have you ever seen that? So to think that that could be random and that the information of life could just spring out of anything would be similar to taking words and dropping them on the page and coming up with Shakespeare's novel. Or if you want to take it one step further beyond that, where did the words come from? So that would be like taking letters and throwing them randomly and coming up with words. Or take it one step beyond that. You want to believe that something came out of nothing and that there's no intelligent design. It would be like, and this is from
Truth Project.
Truth Project. Who else has seen that? Okay. So to take it one step beyond that, it would be like taking ink and splattering it onto a board and having letters form. So then you take, you splatter, you get your letters, and you splatter your letters and get words, and it's nonsense. It's impossible. And one of the most fascinating things I found out in as I was studying this, I found it out a long time ago, but when you talk about the information of life, did you realize that organisms from a particular kind, and I realized that the word kind, I forget what the Hebrew word was, it's something like genus, but that animals from that kind are created with all of the genetic information to form every type of species. So I'll give you an example. So a random house cat, because it's from the cats from that kind, has all of the genetic material to form every other type of cat. So the bobcat, the cheetah, the mountain lions. And that's how that happens. There is no information that is just randomly. Evolution would mean that genetic material would have to materialize out of nothing. Okay, because they believe that, for example, dinosaurs could evolve into birds. So that would mean that there would have to be genetic material that just kind of appeared. But think about that. So like horses, for example, have all the genetic material for donkeys and for, well, the donkey's a cross between a horse and a mule.
A donkey's a donkey.
Mule,
mule.
thank you. Sorry, I don't know my horses.
Henny.
I know nothing.
You know what a henny is?
The horse girls, yes. So, but isn't that fascinating? And, you know, when you think about it too, well, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Hold on, we'll get there in a minute. But back to the information of life that biologists can't determine where it came from. What's John 1:1 say?
In the beginning.
In the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. And some of these verses, I have them on the back side of your pages if you want to take them home and look them up and write them out. Colossians 2:3, in whom Christ are hidden all the treasures of wisdom, all hidden are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. John 4:24, for God is spirit, so those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. You know, it's going through this information, it's my contention, it takes more blind trust. And I won't even call it faith, because faith has a very specific definition in Scripture, but it takes more blind trust to not believe in God, to not believe in a divine creator and an intelligent designer than it does to believe that God spoke the worlds into existence. So that's number 2. Number 3, what they like to call irreducible complexity. So this is another area where evolutionists can't, you know, after centuries, they just can't find answers, but is easily explained by the idea that God spoke things into existence. So in 1859, Charles Darwin, and we're going to kind of dig into who he was in a minute, published the book on origin of species by means of natural selection. Is anyone familiar? Have you heard of that before? So he published this book, and he insisted that evolution only occurred in small steps, not big leaps. Well, that's not evolution. It's natural selection, and natural selection is actually, that's a thing. That happens. But what's fascinating is even the way that Darwin describes natural selection, it would take an intelligent mind to control that or command that. But, you know, Darwin went on to say that if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not have possibly been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. And yet it did break down. Isn't that fascinating? And yet there is a reason why, as human beings, we want to hold on to something that we have been told throughout the ages, even when it's not rooted in truth. You know, and the other thing I found out about when I was in college about Darwin's book, so he published this book on natural selection. Well, he was still searching for the answers to where life came from, but he was forced to publish his book because one of his competitors was publishing his work on the same subject. So he knew, even at the time that he published it, that it was riddled with flaws and that it never got to the heart of what it was actually trying to prove. They published it anyways. So in talking about the irreducible complexity, So scientists have concluded there are three systems: DNA, RNA. What's the last one? Anybody know?
Wait, say it again?
What is it?
What are they?
DNA, RNA, proteins. I vaguely remember that from ninth grade science. All of these are within every cell, and they are so dependent on each other that they have to all exist at the same time for them to work. So that right there disproves the idea of incremental changes, because if RNA, DNA, and proteins aren't working in conjunction with each other, the cells don't work. So basically what the theory of irreducible complexity is saying is that there are certain organisms that randomly appear that are so complex and no one has an explanation for where those organisms came from. And in the Truth Project, they explained it this way. So if you're walking through the forest and you come across a wristwatch, do you say, oh my goodness, look what just kind of grew up out of one of the weeds? Do you say that? No, of course not. You say somebody created this watch. And that's what we need to do with creation. So evolution is a framework built on assumptions, basically. Any question on that part? We're going to get into Big Bang in a minute, and then we do have some research on dinosaurs, which was the fun part of this. Any question on those three theories? No? So Big Bang, how many of you would say that, or have heard it said that Big Bang could just be God's way of creation?
Mm-hmm.
Has anyone heard that? Kind of like he lit the fuse and that was, well, and I quoted a website at the end of this page, and I really encourage you, that's a source for a lot of the information. There was an exceptional video, just a 2-minute clip on this, where he explains that not only are they not compatible theories, that they are really in competition for each other. And